outside, it looks like a cabin on the outside.
Okay.
We know better. Stinking cabin.
Good afternoon. I'll call this Records Management Committee meeting of October 19th, 2007 to order. Are we in compliance with the open meeting law?
Yes.
Okay. This meeting has been posted in various locations throughout the city. Item number 3 is approval of final minutes by reference of the Records Management Committee meeting of November 14th, 2003. Have a motion?
I'll move.
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any noes? Nope. Okay. Item 4 is discussion of possible action on the appointment of the Records Management Committee chairperson and vice chairperson. Doug Selby had recommended that Orlando chair this committee, so I make a motion to appoint Orlando Sanchez as chair.
No, I second that one.
I didn't have a chance to lobby you all, but
Mhm.
So now we need a vice chair.
I move that Mark Vincent be vice chair.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? Well, sorry.
I'm sorry, all those in favor?
Mm-hmm.
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We voting on both of those at once?
You didn't ask if I was opposed.
Oh,
I guess.
All
Wait,
those
we gotta
opposed?
vote on, was that for Orlando?
Yeah, we had a motion for Orlando.
I'm sorry, we got out of order.
Did we vote on that one?
No, we did not.
So, all those in favor of Orlando as chair?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? And all those in favor for Mark Vincent as vice chair?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? No. Okay. So Orlando's the new chair and Mark Vincent is vice chair.
discussion and possible action regarding the bill draft to incorporate the local government records retention schedules and Nevada Local Government Records Management Program Manual for the City of Las Vegas. Do we have any discussion on this item?
Yeah, I probably ought to explain this to the rest of the group, if you don't mind. Sharon discovered within the last few months that the NAC provisions, which were pretty substantial, that reflected all of the
For the record, Sharon, who?
Sharon Kuhns, who is the queen of all records for the city of Las Vegas, that the Nevada Administrative Code, which contained all of the schedules for all of the local governments, and literally this list contains every record that the state has ever been able to learn of, that every local government of any size accumulates. So it would include stuff like numbers of airport landings for counties that have airports, and of course down to things that every town, city, or county would have, like, you know, correspondence and memos. It's been contained in the Nevada Administrative Code for all the years that I've been practicing, and it's recently been taken out of the code, committed to a manual that the same committee who has always promulgated the code now amends and produces the manual. It's made them more capable of changing it more quickly, because it's just as hard to change a regulation in the Nevada Administrative Code as it is for us to change an ordinance, and harder, in fact, because it requires more than one public meeting and more than one notice and reviewed by the Legislative Council Bureau and so forth. And so now this state committee that produces that list of how long we have to keep all of our stuff has produced a manual as a substitute for the regulations, and the law requires that our city council adopt it by regulation or by ordinance. And since we don't really have any regulations in the municipal code, they're used pretty much interchangeably with ordinances. We're going to have to draft a new ordinance for the city council to bless this new manual. We don't have any choice about it. So that, what it means is that the manual that's been promulgated by the State Records Committee becomes our retention schedule, with the exception that we have the capability to go upwards on any category of record. We just can't go lower than the state committee has set. just need to draft an ordinance, get it in front of the city council, and all it needs to do is say, addition of the manual from June of 2007 is hereby adopted. Unfortunately, any time in the future that the state committee amends this manual, we're gonna have to have the council do the same thing, sort of like a building code adoption.
Do we have a motion to draft the ordinance and to forward it to the mayor and council for adoption?
So moved.
Second.
We don't have a draft yet, do we?
No.
Sharon and I talked about it and actually produced something, but we'll keep it short and sweet.
Yeah, we have to work with Val to get it in ordinance form.
Question.
That is the proper motion then.
Right, do we have a second?
Do you have something?
Just some discussion. This includes, what I'm looking at here, in this particular document, is all paper records. Will this also include electronic records?
Yes, it does.
Believe-
My understanding is, it says the retention period for a record applies to the record regardless of the media in which it is maintained, so
That's right.
it's everything.
And
All-
the, and
all
the,
of it.
and the statute, which this was always the implementing regulation for, is NRS chapter 239. It defines records as records, again, in any form, electronic or otherwise. And there are state agencies, DMV, for example, which hasn't kept a paper record in 20 years. Everything they've got's electronic. Anything you get in paper, they've just pushed a print button. They have no file cabinets any longer. It's been a long time since they moved to that scheme. So I'm pretty sure the answer is yes, Joseph. It includes all your stuff.
And as part of the discussion, we've been working with IT already to go through the books and with Sharon, and we've started working on putting a plan together to work with the departments to help getting the schedules out to each of the records liaisons in each department. So that once we have the ordinance in place, we can.
Yeah. And this manual almost certainly is the one that would include the records for stuff that we don't have, like I said, airport activity and such like. But it also contains everything that conceivably we should be generating. And I guess we have to adopt it in toto. We'll have to figure some clever way in the ordinance to say that we adopt the records such as we produce that are identified in the manual.
Okay, any other discussion on it? Can we have a vote, please? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any not in favor? Okay, item number 7, discussion of possible action regarding a revision to the public records access policy and procedure to be in conformance with Senate Bill 123, SB 123, effective October 1st, 2007. Do we have any discussion or update on that?
Did you say item 7?
Item 6, I said.
Okay, I think you said,
Did I say 7?
Yeah.
I take it back. Item 6, I'm sorry.
We produced a manual some years ago that was a procedure manual supposed to control the activities without regard to specific record types for all custodians in all departments and divisions of the city. And it boils down to how much you're supposed to charge and how quickly you're supposed to get the stuff and what kind of form you're supposed to use for records requests and how to process them, how to destroy records that are confidential and such like. Legislature this session with this SB 123 has changed life for the way that we handle records a little bit. And I should have brought it with me, but I'd say most prominently, everybody who's asked for a record now, who doesn't possess that record, but knows who does possess it, has an obligation to respond in writing and direct the requestor to the right office. Courteous custodians all over the state do that now, but you didn't have a legal obligation to do it before, and now you do, even if it's not within your organization. If it's down the street at the federal courthouse, you have to respond in writing and tell people where they can get records. within 5 days after the time that somebody submits a record request to the legal custodian of the record, we either have to deliver it or inform them in writing that we do not have it, where they might find it, so forth, when we are going to produce it for them. So there was lots of, frankly, bitching by press types that they asked for records and just never heard anything back, ever, which has never been the custom in this organization. In fact, Sharon instituted, and I'm pretty sure it was committed to our manual, 3 days is the response time that we've always shot for. Result of that is that most records custodians around here drop all their other work when they get a public records request so that they can comply. There have been times when it might take a week or two because the things are remotely stored, or they have to be generated in some special format or extracted from a larger volume. But as far as the 5 days, as I said, life has changed now that we have a statutory obligation and we have to give that in writing, but we've pretty much tried to live up to something better than that all along. The statute tells us that if a record is requested from us that contains some items of confidential information, that if it's possible, we have to turn over the record with only the confidential items redacted. So that pretty much answers the question that we get in a lot of training sessions. Somebody says, this piece of paper contains a couple of social security numbers. You know, around here, having a kind of a cooperative attitude, we've generally done that, redacted the social security numbers and then given the remainder of the record. Now the law compels that if it is practical. Confidential records can become otherwise after the passage of 30 years. Some organizations don't keep anything for 30 years, but the author of this bill expressed specifically some real curiosity about, you know, Howard Hughes' gaming application that still reposes in the hands of the Gaming Control Board and the Gaming Commission as a confidential by law record. You know, that now that he's dead, why shouldn't we all be able to see it? That resulted in a provision of the statute being passed that says that after 30 years, a request can be made for a confidential record, or if the person about whom the record is produced is dead at a time sooner, and we may have to produce that record. Interestingly, gaming was specifically excluded from production of such records, so they're never going to see Howard Hughes' application. There's not a ton else, but the fact is our policy, however it might be similar to the new law, does not incorporate any of this new statute, and we have to start working on tuning up our policy so that it perfectly matches the new statute.
Given the effective date of October 1st, how long would it take for us to revise our public records access policy, and including protocols that if we get a request from the media or request for records, that it be referred to the custodian instead of a central location like the PIO, that it actually goes to the department?
Well, first things first, if you're concerned that we might be in non-compliance, Sharon has been, and in writing has communicated the gist and the new requirements of this law to all of her custodians already. So they've already been told what the new rules are and to start following them. The question about conforming our policy is, I mean, it's going to take a few weeks of writing, and it's going to take a meeting or two of this committee to incorporate this new stuff, and it would be useful for us to take a look at other things that we might want to change. And you mentioned the PIOs, and it's a subject that sharpens a little bit with this new law, because it's common practice that the reporters who are familiar with our PIOs call them up and ask for records. But they may be Charlie's records, or Joe's records, or the manager's records. Well, we can't afford to have a clock start when somebody calls, you know, Dave Riggleman and says, do you think you can find something? I think that we're going to have to change this policy a little bit so that in every instance possible, we require that somebody not call up and say, do you think you might be able to find me something? But instead, I am making a public records request. So that if that's the case, the PIOs know not to take it if it's not for a PIO record. That it goes, if it's for finance, to Mark, and then the clock starts running. So there are little things like that that we can tune up, as well as the necessary changes we have to make to the manual to bring us into perfect compliance with the new statute. So if, Beverly, do we have a current manual and backup, or is this all
Yes,
the
it's here.
state's
This is
manual?
it, isn't it?
No, after
This
the
is ours.
second, after your page for number
This is
6
ours.
is our current public records access and a copy of the form.
Okay.
And it does talk about the 3 days
Well,
request for.
When we meet next, we'll come back with the things we know we must change, and then everybody ought to come back with anything that they can spot in this current document that they want to talk about, or they think maybe ought to be changed. And this is a relatively slim thing, Charlie. It's not going to break your brain to have to read it.
You don't know my brain.
Yeah. I mean, it's,
Just a point of record on the agenda item, it talks about SB 123 passing in June 2006. Isn't that 7?
yes.
Should be
Where did you put
2007.
it?
And the purpose and background. No big deal.
Yeah, it was a 2007 statute signed by the governor in June, effective October 1 all this year.
Right.
So Charlie, this last goldenrod part is the current manual. And this is the rhythm of what all departments and all records custodians ought to be trying to live up to when somebody says, I want records. And so it's worth reading and scribbling on, because we must make some changes to conform to the statute, but since it's gonna be open for revision, any useful massaging, this is the time to do.
Any other discussion on the item?
I would suggest, I mean, Sharon and I are obviously gonna have to start working on making sure we put the statutory language in here. That anybody else that has things they see that they wanna talk about, or they have specific ideas about, email them, identify the section of the current. And then when I'm talking about manual, it's a little confusing, because the thing that we've got to adopt by statute is the state manual, which didn't exist before. We've always had our public records access policy and referred to it as the manual, but if anybody would make sure that they email or send recommended changes to Sharon, she's probably the smartest thing, don't you think?
And you're gonna have to copy me, because right now Sharon's in the hospital, and I
Okay.
don't know when she'll be back.
Beverly and Sharon,
Sharon.
please.
Please.
And so, anything that we get from any of our committee members, we'll have on the table to talk about next time.
So can I?
I'm sorry. In reference to that section that you're talking about there, Sharon emailed me copies of information from the state legislature. Are we saying, and we reviewed that, we got back to her and then told her that we had reviewed that? Okay. So are you saying that, and she wrote back and said, we don't need to act on that at this time. I think this was back in, before June. I don't remember the exact date, I didn't bring the paperwork with me. But are we saying that what was in that legislative action or proposed action is now law? Is that what you're saying?
No, but my recollection of the way this progressed to the session, this bill was introduced pretty early, like February, and I don't have any reservations about saying that SB 123 was the single worst piece of legislation I have ever seen in my life. And it changed through a lot of work by government custodians, directors, and government lawyers over a period of months. And so I think Sharon was trying to keep her custodians apprised of how it was, evolving through the session, and so some of the things you might have heard about the law last spring didn't turn out to be the law. If there has been any communication to your department or your divisional custodians recently, and I mean like within the last 4 weeks, it's all up to date. It was Sharon advising these people that they need to tune up and start in practice what's not in our policy manual now, but to incorporate what the new statute told us that we have to do. So she's already alerted everybody. But there were lots of crazy things in that bill months ago that were ejected before they adopted it.
Mr. Chairman, can I clarify something with regard to this item? I'm still trying to digest. We're approving a revision, but there really isn't any revision here other than the incorporation of the bill, the chapter 435, and the cliff notes to that. Is that what we're doing?
No, my understanding is
What
that
revisions have we actually made to
I
our?
don't think there's a single word that's been rewritten. It is, this is the roadmap for what we must do. So there isn't gonna be an attachment of SB 123, any word in SB 123 that we have to live with that the current manual conflicts with, we'll have an amended form for it. It just hasn't been done yet.
Well, that's why I'm asking the question, because the action item says to possible action regarding a revision to the public records access policy, but this is not a revised policy, this is the existing
No,
policy.
the revised policy is not on the table yet, hasn't been written. And so it's possible action to revise, and I'm explaining why.
So if we approve this item, all we're doing is approving that we should go forward and take action?
Yes,
to revise.
we have some absolute obligation to revise it
That's all I
in
wanted to
harmony
know.
with the
That's
statute.
why I
And then we
just-
have an opportunity to revise other things as the committee
It
chooses.
just seemed odd to me that we take an action to revise it. Normally you just go revise it, bring it forward, and take an action to adopt it. But that's all I'm saying.
Would have been nice if the summer had been spent revising our manual,
As
but
opposed to
we
this.
wanted you guys
As
involved.
opposed to this. Okay, I understand.
And if you
I-
notice
I just-
the date of the minutes from our last meeting,
Yes, yes indeed.
Yeah.
2003.
Okay, I understand.
Any other comments, discussion?
No, I move for approval.
Second.
All right, anybody vote against it? Seeing none? Approved.
I would just encourage people, if you know any of your custodians in your departments or divisions that are real interested and real busy with records, it wouldn't be a bad idea to show the manual to them if you think that they might have anything constructive that you could carry back to us. We've got some smart, I mean, we have some custodians who are a little lost. They call Sharon all the time, or they call me. And we have some custodians that are really sharp. And if they ever sat down and read this with instructions to say, this thing has to be amended, anything you can think of we ought to change, as long as it doesn't conflict with law, we can change it.
Do we want to set a timeline to get the comments back to Beverly and back to Sharon? So, or when does this committee meet again? What's the?
We don't have any dates on the table, Chairman, this time.
Yeah, I think we're gonna need,
Schedule.
yeah, we had endless meetings to produce the original manual. I think 2 or maybe 3 meetings is all that's gonna be necessary to wrap all of this up. If we're lucky, it's gonna be 2. I don't know if there's any rhythm to people's availability, or if it's worth it for just 2 or 3 meetings to try to pick a regular date. It may not be, but in a month, we ought to get together and think for sure that we're gonna have to do it 3 weeks after that, and maybe a third time.
And then one quick question, does the whole committee have to meet, or can we do a subcommittee, meet on it, and then bring it back to the full committee? So we want,
I think the drafting work, you don't wanna, as soon as you say subcommittee, you create an open meeting problem. If you designate a subcommittee, the subcommittee becomes subject to the open meeting law. I think it's probably just understood that Sharon is our records expert in this corporation, and I'm the records guy from the law office, and we work together a lot, is that we're gonna wind up doing the drafting, and I'd sure like it if the ideas of others were communicated to Sharon and Beverly. so that we could plug them in as we progress.
So do I need to roll that up in motion, or is it already just been?
I don't think so, just if, you need to, if you, I mean, the one thing that's always okay at a meeting to talk about that may not be agendized is when you're gonna meet next.
Okay.
So if there's any preference or availability that you have the capability to discuss now, do it, but I would think in a month,
Any,
we'll have work for you.
John, how about if we get some available dates in the next maybe 2 or 3 weeks and send them out and in consensus when everyone is free? Will that work?
And an overview of what the requirements going to be. Mhm.
Will that work?
That would work, that would be great.
We'll be happy to do that.
Okay, now on to item number 7, citizen participation. This is public comment during this portion of the agenda must be limited to matters within the jurisdiction of the Records Management Committee. No subject may be acted upon by the Records Management Committee unless the subject is on the agenda and is scheduled for action. If you wish to be heard, come forward and give your name for the record. The amount of discussion on any single subject as well as the amount of time and any single speakers allowed may be limited. Seeing no public comment, no one stepping forward, I move for adjournment.
Second.
We're done.
That was the best meeting ever.
Was that good? 30 minutes.
30 minutes.
Wow, yes, I finished the whole list meeting in 15 minutes.
So is this like have a,
But the
are
next
these